What if we told you that cognitive impairment can be caught in the early stages, and there are things you can do to slow it down and increase your quality of life? Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicheter, and today I'm joined by Tom O'Neill, the CEO of Cognivue, an organization at the forefront of cognitive assessment technology. Together, we'll explore the significance of cognitive assessments and early detection and understand how these assessments can be a game changer in identifying cognitive impairment.
Tom, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited because this conversation is near and dear to my heart. But before we begin, I just want to check in. How are you really?
I'm doing good. We're getting closer to the holidays, so kind of running hard. At the same time as going towards the holidays, is we're also closing the quarter and closing the year from a business perspective. So there's always a million things going on this time of year, but really good, really good.
It's such a stressful time of year.
Yeah, I'm excited too though because I have two boys. They're 26 and 22. The 26-year-old is in Topeka, Kansas, so he's flying in to be with us for the holidays, and then my 22-year-old is a junior in college, so he's now home. So we get to have them both home, which is great.
Oh, that's so nice. Oh, it's really great when the family gets to be back together. My younger brother, so I was away at college and now he's away at college. So it's so exciting. And he used to be so excited when I'd come home, and I was like,
Yeah.
why are you so excited? It was so annoying until now. I'm like, when are you coming home? I miss you. Please come back. So I'm excited for the holidays and getting my little brother back
It's funny you
until
say
he
that.
talks. Then I'm
Yeah,
done with him.
right. It's funny you say that because I see that with my younger son being excited for Sean to come home, and he talks about it, and then they get together, and then they're normal, and then they go back to doing their own things.
Yeah. Right? It's like you can't wait. And then after a second, you're like, okay, goodbye.
Okay. That's what it feels like. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm speaking of the holidays. I have a grandmother who has Alzheimer's, and with the holidays, it can be really, really stressful for her because it's so much happening, right? It's constantly having to remember, did I give this person their card yet? Anxious to want to give them this card. And all these things that seem so minorly stressful to us is really amplified for her. So I'm excited about our conversation on early detection for Alzheimer's because I wish we had more resources, tools, support beforehand so that this would be maybe a little bit easier for both her and us as her caregivers.
Yeah, Frank, I'll give you the Alzheimer's Association, their busiest time of the year is now during the holidays, the next few weeks. And the reason it is because our parents, our moms, our dads, our grandmas, our grandpas, aunts, uncles, whoever we're caregivers to, when it's a 10-minute FaceTime, call or a regular phone call, they can kind of fake their way through it. Our parents and grandparents are really good at kind of getting through those calls. But all the Alzheimer's Association gets the most calls during the holidays, and the reason they do is because now all of a sudden you and I are with them for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, a week, 2 weeks, and all of a sudden what they used to be able to kind of, they're really good at keeping their independence, and they don't want to let on that there might be something going on. So now all of a sudden you're with them and you start to see stuff that just may be off a little bit, right? And to your point too, they stress about things. So some of that early Alzheimer's or early dementia will show itself as hyper OCD, right? So it'll show itself in that way. And so things that you would think of used to not worry them or they used to not overthink. Now they're overthinking, right? And I think it all just comes down to the pressure and stress and I see that not necessarily the early dementia with my parents, but I see that worry about the details that they would have just rolled with in the past. So yeah, it's a stressful time for them.
It is. My grandma used to be a pro at Christmas presents, always got everyone like the best presents. Like she, amazing.
Yeah.
Now she's panicking over making sure everyone gets a card with money in it.
Right.
And it's like, did I give this person this card? When am I going to see them? Will I see them? And it's like this constant panic because a lot of it is she doesn't remember that she has seen someone recently and that she
Right.
has given them the card, or that she does see them on a frequent basis and she will see them again before Christmas, or that she's going to spend Christmas with her family. So for
Yeah.
her, it's really overwhelming of this bit of a memory piece. And it's really hard. I've noticed I'm with her most of the time. I part-time in California, part-time in Florida, living with her, taking care of her. So
Mhm.
I see it the most, and then I see my loved ones who maybe don't get to spend as much one-on-one time with her, and they're like, "Oh,
Yep.
she's fine. She just forgets a little." And I'm like, "Well, wait till you're with her for more than 10 minutes,
Right.
and you're
Yep.
going to understand how these small things make a big impact to her." That phone call that was 2 minutes makes such a big deal because she might not remember it happened 10 minutes later,
Yep.
but knowing like your name's and fresh in her head, it makes her feel really good and she wants
Right.
to talk to you. She looks forward to talking to you and it makes such an impact. So I just think, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that the Alzheimer's Association is seeing that raise in numbers because watching with my family, it's a big difference when it's 10 minutes, an hour, 4 hours to 10 days.
Fran, the other thing that I see happen and that I've heard happen, because I've been in this world for 6 years now at Cognivue, but is that in very early stages of mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's, early dementia, they are still um, strong enough cognitively to know, okay, and they can have a really good productive conversation with you. Okay, this is early Alzheimer's, early dementia. I know I have it. I'm going to put some affairs in order, and then it progresses, and that's where it becomes more of a challenge because they actually forget that they have it and they don't recall that they don't remember. So early on, they actually recognize that they're not remembering. Further along in the process, it actually becomes more challenging because now they actually don't remember that they have now Alzheimer's. So they may become more argumentative, may be more challenging to deal with because they've lost that short-term memory, and that becomes a challenge, right? So it becomes frustrating for them, and we as caregivers have to remember, as difficult as it can be sometimes, not to get frustrated. You can't get frustrated with them because they're they're just struggling, or they don't even realize that they're frustrating you. They're just asking a question that they don't realize they asked you 2 minutes before. They're just asking it again because they're wondering.
Yeah, that's so true. And with my grandma, one thing that I really regret is when she started off in the beginning with those early memories, she's recognizing she's losing her memory a bit. We're like, oh, that's just a normal sign of aging. And then she also had been in a car accident. So we're like, maybe that's it. And now we're at this point where she doesn't remember that she doesn't remember. She is asking the same question every 5 seconds over and over again because a conversation doesn't last long for her.
Right.
And it's not her fault. But it's also now at this point where we wanted to get her affairs in order and we didn't. So there is no power of attorney right now. There is no will. There's none of
Right.
these things. And when we try to take her to a lawyer, she can't remember. So she didn't pass that cognitive assessment.
Right.
So I wish that back then we had some kind of assessment. We did that assessment. We knew a lot more so that this stuff would have been easier, not just for us, but for her as well, because that has to be scary when you're the one making medical decisions or
Sure.
finance decisions and you can't necessarily recall the conversation that you just had 5 seconds ago to respond and make that decision.
Fran, I think the biggest challenge for most, and I would tell you, most people have been touched by dementia or Alzheimer's, either as a caregiver of, again, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, or uncle, or some type of traumatic brain injury, concussion, something, right? So they've seen some of that. But healthcare has gotten so good that in many instances, our bodies are outliving our brains. And the challenges too is we test and screen and assess everything in the body, but we don't consistently test or screen or assess the brain health or cognition. So it's interesting because you're right. Like you can't get ahead of it because the doctors aren't naturally talking about it. And I'm talking about primary care, internal medicine, family practice. They're just not talking about it proactively unless you bring it up as a caregiver or the patient brings it up proactively. It's not being brought up. So I think we have to do more. That's kind of the mission we have, is to make cognitive screening, brain health screening and assessment the norm, right? The fifth vital sign, if you will, so that it becomes a regular conversation, maybe even in your 30s or 40s, so that it's a normal part of the process of your annual wellness visits and annual wellness checks and all that other stuff. This should be a regular part of the conversation.
Absolutely, it should be. And if we're having it early enough, people can start making those changes, right? Because some of it may be genetic, but there's other things that we may be able to do to help prevent it, or not even prevent it, but slow it down a little bit, right? Take a
Yeah.
little bit more control of our health. So these conversations are so important. And that's what I love about Cognivue. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization and these assessments that you have?
Sure. So Cognivue, we're as much a medical device company as we are a software company, but we have the first FDA cleared computerized test of cognition. Okay, so we test our device, which looks like, think of it like a large laptop, but it tests a patient in 10 minutes, does an assessment. It tests that patient's cognition, and it tests for mild cognitive impairment. We're not a diagnostic tool. We don't tell the patient whether they have Alzheimer's or dementia. Only a doctor can do that. But we're a tool to help the doctor identify whether that patient maybe has no impairment, mild cognitive impairment, or severe impairment. And then it's up to the doctor to determine kind of what the next steps are, because the next steps might be meeting with a neurologist or a neuropsych, to do a little bit deeper dive and really understand what's going on with that patient.
I love that because cognitive impairment, there can be early signs that just as doctors who see you for 15 minutes every 6 months may not notice. And that's not that necessarily they don't want to notice, but when it's not a regular part of the conversations and screenings, like we've said, and you're not with them for long enough to maybe see it, it can be really difficult. So having these assessments that gives the doctor a starting point, like, hey, this patient may have some mild cognitive impairment. Maybe we should do some more testing. Maybe we should refer them out. Or let's pay attention. Is this progressing? Or maybe this is caused by a concussion that just happened.
Yeah.
So giving them that starting point is so helpful because it can change the trajectory of someone's quality of life.
Fran, I couldn't agree more. I think the real challenge within this current health system in the US is that, and I have a lot of friends and past colleagues that are primary care, internal medicine, family practice doctors, and they're required to see anywhere from 30 to 40, 50 patients a day. So they get maybe 10 minutes, right? So if they're running through that many patients, they're really more triaging current issues. And the first, they're going to look at cardiovascular, they're going to look at diabetes, they're going to look at, breathing issues, other stuff. Cognitive function really doesn't even come into the conversation unless, again, the patient brings it up or the caregiver brings it up. And just what you said earlier, sometimes the answer from the doctor is, oh, don't worry, that's just part of aging. That memory loss is part. It is not a part of normal aging. It is a heads up or a sign that something might be going on. So you got to think about it in three ways. First off, patient flow. So how do you get through 30 to 40 to 50 patients a day and have a meaningful, deep conversation about it? It's really difficult. Now, if you do a cognitive assessment, it does, some of the commercial payers, the Blue Crosses of the world and others may not cover the cost of that for a primary care or internal medicine family practice doc. They will for the specialist, but not necessarily. So if you're a doctor and you only have so much time, you're going to devote your time and your staff's time to doing some of that. And now you're not getting reimbursed for it. That becomes a challenge, right? And the third thing, so the first two are patient flow and whether you're going to get reimbursed. The third thing is there's no pill, right? So there's not a prescription that they can write for it. So if the intervention right now, and there are medications coming to market, but if the only intervention is things like diet, exercise, lifestyle, mindfulness, diabetes care, hearing, vision, those are all things that I think are very powerful and empowering to a patient, especially if they know what the score is and that there's a way to measure that. But when I talk to doctors, sometimes their answer is, I already counsel my patients to eat right and exercise. And I said, I know you do. I totally respect and appreciate that. But like, I didn't start taking my Lipitor and watching my cholesterol intake until I saw my score, right? My cholesterol score. So like, to me, this is an inflection point. You have a score from an FDA assessment. It may empower your patients to take control of those controllable, what's called the modifiable risk factors, to your point, that could slow down the progression of the disease.
It makes such a big difference when you can see it on paper too, because otherwise it's like other people are telling me. And I think
Right.
I see that with my grandma a lot when sometimes I maybe treat her more as if she's my child and I'm the parent. And she'll pick up on it sometimes, be like, you don't have to tell me to eat and make my dinner. It's at the table for me.
Right.
And maybe sometimes I don't. Maybe sometimes she's really good at that. But then there's times when maybe
When
she's
she's not.
not. So when she does notice, she's like, you have to do these things. And I'm like, well, sometimes it's really helpful to have someone. I'm like, something that you really struggle with sometimes is preparing your own food. So I'm not doing it to kind of take things away from you. I'm just trying to help. And to her, it's my granddaughter thinks that the word she uses is senile. She's like, my granddaughter thinks I'm senile and doesn't trust me to take care of me. But I think when they kind of make her do a little bit of an assessment and she has to draw a clock and then say the 3 words back to them,
Right.
she sees, oh, maybe that is something I'm starting to struggle with. And she sees it on paper. It's
Yep.
not my family members are creating this because they want
Right.
to take something from me or they don't
Right.
trust me or it's
Right.
because I'm older, but to actually see it, it makes it a lot more real. And I'm sure earlier on, if you see it, you're like, oh, this is something that could be happening to me, but there are things I can do. Not only is it seeing it, it's empowering you now to decide whether or not you want to do something about it instead of just sitting there and be like, well, I never knew, so I never did anything. It's giving you that choice to make a change or not make a change.
Well, Fran, one of the things you mentioned, which is really important, is there's been cognitive testing in place for 30 or 40 years or longer, but it's been paper and what we call paper and pencil question and answer kind of, and they're administered by a clinician, they're scored by a clinician. And my guess is you've sat in on some of those and watched your grandma take it, and it's demeaning to the patient. It's hard for any adult to have to take a test, question and answer test in front of another adult. And so there's all kinds of negatives and challenges that come with that. Ours is a self-administered, self-scored, and I'll say it's a little bit more, it's no question and answer. It's all exercises. So it's almost gamification of cognitive testing. And so all of our patient feedback is very positive. They like it better than what you would define as a MOCA or an MMSE, or what you just the example you gave was a mini cog. And so, there are real benefits to making it easy and not something that is uncomfortable or degrading to one of the patients. The other thing that I hear when I hear you talk about your grandma is, and something I don't want us to lose sight of, is there is tremendous stress, pressure, and anxiety on caregivers. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on that. That could be stress and anxiety of just taking care of grandma, right? And what comes along with that. And the further they progress, the more difficult that becomes, right? For all the reasons that we talked about. The financial challenges at times, because many times caregivers have to quit work just to be able to take care of mom or dad or grandma, grandpa. Um, And I don't think we give enough support to those caregivers. And those caregivers are people that really do so much for so little. And it really, so I want to make sure we recognize that and make sure that those caregivers are finding support systems for themselves, therapy and support for themselves, but also like taking note of their own well-being, because I think as a caregiver, you're so giving of all of yourself that you can almost lose yourself in that process. And I just want to make sure that we're recognizing that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so important that we acknowledge how difficult it is to be a caregiver and how you may make mistakes and that's okay. You
That's
don't
okay.
have to know exactly what you're doing all the time. And in the beginning, for me, that was a big thing. I was like, I should have known to do it this way. I should have known to not use this language. I should have known. And the reality
But
of it is,
how? How?
exactly how? How am I supposed to know when people don't want to have these
Right.
conversations? How am I supposed
Right.
to know when I've never gone through it before? How am I
Mhm.
supposed to know if I didn't even know we were going through this?
Yep.
So giving myself a lot of grace. Like I'm learning too. And if I
Yep.
mess up, I don't have to like hate on myself. I can choose to educate myself and
Yeah.
reflect on what I did wrong. Maybe snapping after she asked me the same question 10 times while I was trying to get ready
Right.
wasn't the best idea. What could I have done to alleviate that stress and be able to answer that question another time?
Yeah.
And it's learning that sometimes I'm going to snap, but I need to recognize it and I need to make sure she's not crying because she didn't mean to ask 10 times. It is a brand new question to her. And
Yeah. I think for,
recognize,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Didn't mean
oh,
to interrupt.
you're good. I just want to like recognize that it's going to be hard for both of you. It's not going to
Yeah.
be easy on either one of you. They're not trying to irritate you. You're not trying to get irritated. They're not trying to make it difficult for you to take care of them. You're not trying to overstep and take something away from them. It's a balance that both of you have to find together that may shift 10 times a day.
Yep. Well, I think what I was going to say is I think you mentioned it, and it's a word I use often is you have to have grace. You have to have grace for the individual you're caring for yourself, but also in society. If somebody reacts in a way that seems way out of proportion, and if you know them, it's a friend and it's way out of character, you don't know. They may be a caregiver to somebody that they're dealing with, or maybe a work issue. It's just a grace issue. Like, understand they may be going through the worst thing in their lives. And if you see that it's out of proportion, or if you see that however the whatever that reaction is, give that person a little bit of grace, because you don't know what they're going through. And it could be something back to this, or something with work, or something in life, or something in health. Like, I think grace is a big word. And I think grace to me is something this world could use a whole lot more of. And I think that's, I think it's an important message as well, just, from my perspective.
Absolutely. And that's something that my friends and I have really started talking about lately because my grandma and I are a package duo. We're always together. So they've learned if they want to have dinner with me, my grandma's going to be there. And they're all okay with it. They love my grandmother. They've known her forever. They grew up with me. So, but they've noticed that sometimes my responses may be like a little out of proportion. So if she asks a question, I may actually walk away for a minute sometimes.
Yep.
And they're like, I don't understand why you walk away and make her feel bad. I'm like, I'm walking away for a second because I've heard this question 200 times today. And it's asked in a mean way. And she's not trying to be mean to me, but she's like, my granddaughter's 25. Why doesn't she have a full time 9 to 5? Meanwhile,
Yep.
I'm in school full time and taking care of her full time
Right.
and doing a nonprofit. There's like, and explaining that to her is not easy because she doesn't understand that she needs support. She doesn't understand that I'm going to school still. So
Yep.
sometimes I'm like, I need to walk away so I can take a deep breath and respond in a respectful way to her. Because I can
And I
only
think
answer
that,
that question so many
yeah,
times a day. And they've learned that when they see me do these things, like walk away for a second or take a deep breath before responding, that it's just me trying to cope. And then they might jump in and ask a question or jump in and answer it or steer the conversation. So we've learned together that it's not easy, that my responses may not always be the same as the way I used to be, or the way I am when my grandmother might not be the person asking the question. And that they've started to give me more grace with it and learn that Francesca's doing her best. And sometimes Francesca just needs to vent or take a step back, and that's okay.
Brent, I first off, I think you're amazing. I think
Thank you.
the what you do for your grandma, but then also how you carry that message like forward. Like, listen, I'm 55, I'm an old guy, right? So to see that, to see no, to see seriously, to see that in you and to hear that message from you, I think that's awesome, right? Because I think the more you can spread that, I think it's amazing. I think it's awesome. I think you're one of those special people that are here to do that. And so just continue to it, right? Because you don't want to have to be 55 at my age figuring it out, right? You're figuring it out well before I did. And I think that's awesome. I think the more people you can touch, because this disease, and it's an insidious disease. If you think about it, you'll find people that have lived through heart attacks and all kinds of heart issues, strokes, all cancer, but nobody has lived through dementia or Alzheimer's. So in 7 billion on the planet, right? So the more you can get the word out about like the earlier detection, the better. The more you empower that person to take control of their brain health, the more at the same time you're also communicating about caretakers and how to, like you just did it so beautifully, like how you do it yourself, right? Like how do you maybe at times have to step away, and I hope you do other things like meditation and breathing, and because there's a lot of things we can do to take care of ourselves, and I think those are really important to get out to the world and educate and inform people, um, especially the earlier in life, because I just think there's tremendous stresses in this world, and you're dealing with some major ones in caretaking. Um, Leverage everything, like whether it's breathing, whether it's meditation, whether it's diet and exercise and therapy, do all those things because your well-being is critical to not only the person you're caretaking, but to yourself and the world.
Absolutely. And it's something I'm learning to do, right? Is make that balance between me and her because
Mhm.
both of us are important. And sometimes one of us may take precedence, and that's okay.
And it's going to get more, right? It's going to get heavier the further she gets along. And at some point, you guys are going to have to make a decision of when is it so much that you can't do it, and what does that look like at that point?
Yeah, and that's been a fun thing to explore. So we're going to go back to the assessments because I do want to talk more
Yep,
about our system.
absolutely.
But one thing that I'll say it's been very difficult to explore is finding outside help.
Mhm.
And I go back and forth for school. I travel from Florida to California. And when I'm in California, I can't physically be here. So I have a caretaker come in those few days. But I've had the caretaker call out for 2 weeks now. And that's a really stressful thing because then what do you do when no one's there?
Yeah,
And the rest of my family's at work and they can't step in. So learning that it's not always going to be what you expect, and you can plan and have every single plan in place, and
you're right.
yet it still doesn't work the way you need to. And that there has to be other support and resources out there. You can't go through it alone. And that's what I've really started to learn is that you can't go through it alone. But I want to go back to the assessments because something I've been talking to my parents about lately is
Mhm.
so they're in their 50s and I want them to start getting cognitive assessments done. And
Yeah,
they sometimes get a little sensitive to it because they're like, you know, I'm not where your grandmother is. And I'm like, well, no, you're not.
no,
You're in your 50s. She's in her late 70s. You're in different time zones or different time frames of
yeah,
your life. But what if you do have the same genetic component? Or what if you are at risk? Why don't we want to know earlier and see what we can do? Because maybe we can't completely prevent it. But wouldn't you want to have a better quality of life if you could? You could have a
absolutely.
better quality of life at the end of your life. Wouldn't you do everything you could to take it?
That- So, so that is our mission. So we promote and advocate for earlier testing, earlier screening in a number of different settings. So whether that's at a pharmacy, at an audiologist, at an optometrist's office, or in your primary care or internal medicine family practice location. And I think what you're talking about is the more you can normalize cognitive testing, like make it the fifth vital sign, the and start in your 30s, right? Start in your 40s. Get a baseline and track yourself over time so that if you see it, because just because you may have a genetic predisposition to it does not mean that you're going to get it. Just because you may have that amyloid plaque buildup does not mean you're going to have Alzheimer's. So I think it's, Alzheimer's is the best way I heard it described to me is a systemic issue, multiple systems, right? Inflammation, circulation, and toxins. Inflammation, circulation, and toxins, separate from genetics. So just think about if there are modifiable things you can change, whether it's your diet, your exercise, maybe it's alcohol intake, maybe it's smoking, all those things, the sooner you can identify it, the sooner you can make changes, right? And to your point, either stop or slow the progression of that MCI, that mild cognitive impairment, before it becomes something more permanent like Alzheimer's.
Yes, and I think that inflammation piece is so important because what we put into our bodies genuinely impacts us, and that's something we do have a good amount of control over. Now, budget may make that a little more difficult for many of us as we see the cost of food going up, especially the more
Sure.
organic, healthy options. However, we do have different tools available to us to see what does and doesn't work with our bodies. And that can be something as simple as paying attention to how you feel after you eat. If you notice that maybe you're bloating a little bit more, it's upsetting your gut, those may be causing inflammation. So that's extra inflammation in your body that you don't need. And that's something you can avoid just by paying attention to yourself. Then if you have a little bit more resources or an insurance that's willing to cover it, there's different blood tests you can have run that can tell you what foods react with your body. So
Yeah.
there are small things that we can do, and it can be as simple as being mindful or as extensive as getting testing run that we can actually do. And inflammation in our bodies is not just linked to cognitive impairment, it's linked to so many
Right.
different
So
things.
many different things. Yep.
So, and it's something we have the ability to do right now, no matter what age we are. Pay attention to something small that genuinely can impact every single piece of our health just 5 months from now.
Right. Yep, I agree. It's interesting you mentioned the diet side of this and what you put into your body. Um, a year ago, I was on a number of conference calls with, and this sounds kind of out there, but they had pulled a number of NASA engineers and scientists together to try to, brilliant minds, right? To try to figure out what could they do, how could NASA help with healthcare, because it's such a challenge. And at the end of a number of calls, they asked me, so Tom, what do you think? Right? Like, and I think like anything else, you get brilliant scientists and engineers like they have together, they start thinking of highly complex issues within the healthcare system. And I said, honestly, I'd start at the beginning. The really simple piece is I'd go to the underserved areas and look at the food deserts and education. If you can improve, like, because you can go to any bodega in an inner city and you will not find fruits or vegetables, right? And so if you can fix diet within the underserved community and you can improve education, I said, all the other stuff is great. And yeah, you can fix it downstream, but if you can fix those things early on, it significantly improves every other outcome down the line. Like that's where the heavy lift and the work has to be done.
Yeah, and it just goes to show how much having resources impacts your health
Absolutely.
and your future. And if we're
Absolutely.
not paying attention to who doesn't even have access to resources they need, who genuinely are eating food that's full of toxins, right? That's
Right.
causing inflammation in their body. And we're just going to sit here and be like, well, diet and exercise, it's a lot more than that. Like you said, it's the whole system in place. It's the whole
Yeah.
system in place It's not just diet and exercise and you'll be fine. It's how can we make sure that people are getting the right nutrients that they need? How can we make sure people have clean water? Because you can tell people to hydrate all day, but if they're drinking water full of toxins, is that really helpful?
Right.
You can tell people to go for a walk, get outside, but they're walking outside into complete pollution and hurting their lungs. Was that helpful? So it really is a system in place that needs to be updated. In some way, we need to start making these changes.
I've been in some of the most progressive primary care um, clinics where some of them have full kitchens in the building, and they have certain days of the week where they have fruits and vegetables, so a couple things, so that they're selling fruits and vegetables to their community and their patients who may not might not have a car, so that they're giving it to those that live near them, and then having cooking classes for how to cook healthy within the primary care setting. Think about that. That's basic fundamental stuff that it's a very progressive way of looking at family practice internal medicine, but is absolutely needed. And I wish it was something that was more broadly accepted or looked at and done. But there are places, friends of mine that are primary care doctors in the Southern California, and this is in Buffalo that I just referenced. That's where it has to go. Again, take care of those fundamental needs, and it changes everything.
Yes, getting right into that local community and
Mhm.
offering to bridge those gaps.
Yep,
I mean,
absolutely.
cooking classes may seem so silly to put in a primary care place, but also a lot of people don't know how to create their own meals, or they only know how to maybe fry something,
That's
right? We
exactly.
love oil. We love
Yep.
oil. And I remember for me in college, when I was first starting to really cook, I just drenched everything in olive oil. I was like,
Yeah.
it's what Italians do, drench everything in olive oil
Yep.
and garlic.
Right.
And then air fryers came out and they're like, you don't need oil.
Right.
That was
Yeah.
like huge. And I was like, wow, oil tastes really good. Really great way to season some food. However, I'm
Right.
also putting a lot of oil that I might not need to put into my body all the time. And I wasn't realizing that these small ingredients that I'm using and the way I cook something could impact how I was feeling.
Mhm.
Eating French fries versus roasted potatoes made such a big difference in how I felt. So paying attention to a lot of people just don't know because they weren't handed down a bunch of cookbooks and
Right.
had family members who had plenty of time to sit there and teach them how to cook things in different ways or don't know how to use different ingredients. And by just teaching people, here's how you can make vegetables taste good and still keep their nutrients.
Right.
It's something that seems so simple, but like the reality of it is, most of us don't necessarily know how to do that
Right.
until someone teaches us.
Right. Right. I agree. Or it's too late and now you've already moved into a place where maybe you have poor vascular health or diabetes, and vascular dementia is the biggest form of dementia. It's the biggest cause of dementia. So like what are those things that are causing some vascular issues, right? Including diabetes and other things, smoking and the lack of exercise. Like those are, to your point, and I hate to make it sound like it's simple because none of this is simple. And changing behavior is one of the more challenging things, right? People have to do, especially when so many unhealthy things are. And listen, I'm not sitting here telling you I'm the most healthiest person on the planet, because Lord knows I'm not. But when it's so accessible and it's so difficult to change that behavior, it's not something I'm suggesting is easy. It's something that I'm suggesting that if you do assessments early on and you see, again, I'll use the cholesterol meds as an example. Like I didn't start changing my diet and I didn't start taking my Lipitor until I saw what my score was, and I got that under control. Same with brain health. Let's make it a normal part of the conversation. So when you go to your parents, they're not like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure I want to take a test. But if you said, hey, it's no question and answer, it's self-administered, it's self-scored, it takes 10 minutes, and you can get a baseline, then you can have that for the future. Now all of a sudden it sounds a whole lot less scary than sitting in front of a clinician, having them give you the assessment, asking you questions, looking for the right answers, and then scoring you on it. I don't know many adults that want to sign up for that.
Oh yeah. I have this like giant fear of failing. So if
Mhm.
tests like that stress me out. Just being
Yep.
asked a question at the doctor, I'm like, don't
Right.
want to answer this wrong. Right? It's very stressful. So
Sure.
putting someone in the position to know, like to actively know they're testing my cognitive functioning right now, and people around me are telling me that I'm losing my memory,
Right.
right? Like that's very overwhelming. Are you going to be able to
Absolutely.
even focus?
Right. Yep.
And it
100% agree.
and it can feel really embarrassing if your family members are in the room with you too, and it's like, see, I told you. Right? It's like I
Right.
told you can't remember this, and now you're struggling because that feels bad. Like it
Yeah.
feels bad to feel like you're losing control in some way. Nobody wants to lose control. Nobody wants to lose their memory. Nobody wants to start to decline. So why? But it's the reality of it is it happens.
Yeah.
So how can we make it the most humanizing, empathetic experience instead of making it so cold and degrading?
Mhm. I agree 100%. I think that all comes down to, again, the sooner you know, the bigger impact and the changes you can make. Now, I mentioned new medications. So ASI, a pharmaceutical company, just got Leqembi approved, and CMS came out and said they're going to pay for it, which is great. And CMS also came out and just said they're going to pay for the PET scan that's required. What Leqembi does is it removes some of the plaque, excuse me, some of the amyloid plaque buildup in the brain. Um, Eli Lilly's drug is expected to be approved and here this month or next month, more likely in January. That'll be the second one in that class of drugs. But there's going to be 13 more medications that are expected to be approved in the next 4 years. Some of them in that amyloid class of removing amyloid. Some of them will be anti-inflammatory. They'll have all different kinds of modes of action. So there's help coming, right? But even when there's medications, nothing's going to beat diet, exercise, lifestyle, mindfulness, hearing, vision, the things that people can control themselves without having to go on a medication.
Yeah, because even though some places may help cover it, a lot of places may not. A lot of insurance companies may not help cover it. And also, with a high demand, sometimes there is a lower supply. So, what are some things that you can do in the meantime when you can't access it? What are some small changes you can make? One thing I'm working on with my grandma. I love her so much, but she's really against hearing aids because she doesn't want to look old. And I'm like, no, I get it, but you're about to be 80. And no one's going to question you wearing hearing aids. It's like, I'm like, I hate to break it to you, but no one's going to look at you and be like, wow, she's wearing hearing aids. She must be old. They're like, oh,
Yeah,
she's 80. Of course, she's wearing hearing aids. That all her friends are. Like, that's a
yeah.
normal thing in their friend group. They talk about it, they tune their hearing aids at the dinner table. Why she won't wear them, I don't know. But vent
Here,
over on that. But
no, but
her hearing can impact dementia, can impact cognitive functioning. And I keep trying to explain that to her, and still she's not wearing her hearing aids today. So it did not
well,
win that battle yet.
a big part of our business is in audiology, is in with the hearing care professionals. It takes on average a patient 7 years from the start of their hearing loss to actually getting hearing aids. 7 years. So think about that, right? Like for some, maybe it's a cost issue, maybe it's a ego issue, right? They don't want to look like but if you think about the really simple, it's the most modifiable risk factor. So we hear with our ears, but we process those sounds with our brain. So if we're not feeding the brain those sounds, then we lose some of that ability, right? Our brain starts, and the oversimplified way of explaining it, some of our parts of our brain will start to shut down, right? So the more that we can keep our brain active, right? Hearing's an important component of that. The more we're socializing, right? The more we're, having, the more we're getting out, and the more we're active with others. I think that's a big component, and something that again you can empower people to make those changes. It's not just your hearing. if they know that their hearing actually then links back to their brain health, maybe it's an easier decision to go, you know what, I'm going to get some hearing aids.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm learning, trying to get through to my grandma.
Yep.
But it's something that maybe if we had talked about with her earlier, right? It's maybe if this wasn't something that was new with the memory loss and having a caregiver now and having my granddaughter tell me what to do all the time. If it wasn't
Right.
happening all at the same time, maybe she would be a little more willing to
Yeah.
try the hearing aids. And that's why this early detection is so important. That's why paying attention and being able to educate others on every single thing you do impacts your brain health. So let's make decisions together. And you're going to make the wrong decision sometimes. I just had a huge piece of birthday cake right before we started recording. I will preach what you put in your body all day while also eating some cake. Because, hey, cake tastes good. Am I going to eat cake all the time? I wish, but no.
Right.
So, and that's the thing, it's making those choices and being aware, like, I want to enjoy this cake, I'm going to enjoy this cake. But I also want to put good things in my body as well. So maybe I'm going to pay attention to make sure I have some more fruits and vegetables throughout the day as well.
Yes.
I didn't get a chance to go for a walk today, so I'm going to do something to move my body later. Or maybe I'll do it tomorrow and I'll add an extra 5 minutes to make myself feel better that I made up some time.
Right.
So, right, but it's small things that we can do, and being aware of it, we can then make choices that empower us. So at least
Right.
we're making choices and we get to feel in control. When we don't know and then we look back on it, it's like, I wish I knew. Well, now we know. What choices do you want to make? And it's up to you if you want to make those choices for you. We can tell you to a blue in the face that these are all the options available. These are all the things that can impact you. But by talking about it, people are able to empower themselves to make those choices. And that's what we need, is to feel empowered that we have the ability to ask, can you do an assessment on me early on? What can I do to reduce the inflammation in my body, reduce some of these toxins, the circulation, improve my circulation? What are things, what medications are available? Is this something I qualify for? Is this something maybe to look for later down the line when insurance companies are covering this? Do I want to consider my health insurance company a little bit more as I'm moving forward? What are small things that we can do? That's where it comes down to.
I couldn't agree more. You summed it up perfectly. I want to give you a big amen, because that is 100, everything you just said, you're preaching to the choir. That's exactly what needs to happen.
It is, and it's so important that, again, it's something that people think this happens to me and there's nothing I can do. And unfortunately, it does. There's not a lot we can do once it starts if we're not
Sure.
taking care of ourselves. It's not something that's 100% preventable, but maybe we can prevent it. Maybe we can reduce the impact it has on us. Maybe we can improve our quality of life. And that maybe that bit of hope that we can do something, hopefully helps people understand that they can make these choices for themselves and they should decide what's right for them and ask these questions to their doctors.
100% agree, friend. Again, I appreciate the work you're doing to spread the word. It's why I try to do the same, either through my own conversations with individuals on podcasts or with the advocacy of my entire organization. But I do think it's something that we need to continually communicate and educate people on, so we can empower them to take control.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today. As we're wrapping up, how can people learn more about Cognivue?
Yeah, they could just go to our website, www.cognivue, COGNIVUE.com. They can go read up on Cognivue, what we do, how we do it. They can also, print some information and take it to their doctor if they want, to ask their doctor to bring a Cognivue in. We can do a free trial for the doctors to try the technology in their practice. But there's also on our website access to Cognivue, which is just a really simple way of explaining those modifiable risk factors: diet, exercise, lifestyle, mindfulness, hearing, vision, the things that empower a patient. So you can go on and educate and inform yourself on those modifiable risk factors that, by the way, are not a Cognivue driven. Cognivue is ours, but the things that are in Cognivue are from the Healthy Brains, the CDC Healthy Brains Initiative, and the WHO, initiative around dementia care and those modifiable risk factors. So go on and learn about those things. And again, we're willing to help and connect dots if you want to know, where a doctor is or where an audiologist is or where a pharmacy is in your market. Go to the website.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.